And talk about earning respect. Martin Bakole seems to have, through the string of wins that he's had in his recent victory, of course, over Jared Anderson, has started to get the respect of his peers and boxing fans, and the momentum has very much swung towards this heavyweight, who wasn't seen as someone who might get to the top, is now scratching the claws in his way up the ladder, and it sees him get an opportunity against Anthony Joshua. And we're believed to, if Martin Bakole's words are having spoken to him and his conversation he had with Spencer Oliver on TalkSport, that the fight with Anthony Joshua is now signed, agreed, and to be taking place in Africa as well, with it to be believed to be taking place in Congo, which was Zaire, where the Rumble in the Jungle did take place many, many years ago. So a bit of history being rekindled and being touched upon through Saudi Arabia's involvement in Turkey Al-Sheikh making Joshua versus Martin Bakole. We'll have a poll. I'll get to Vinny behind the scenes as to who you would put as the favorite, Martin Bakole or Anthony Joshua in that fight, if that fight does get over the line over in Africa. But Josh, your immediate response and reaction to the possibility that these two heavyweights will be colliding in another continent?
I like the fight. I do like the fight, but I think it's out of the current crop for AJ that is a realistic fight. I think it's the riskiest one of them all, excluding all the world champions at the moment, or the world champion at the moment, Usyk and Dubois. I think Bakole's the biggest risk. I think he's the one which you can't really get a lot of sparring that can replicate his type of style that he's got. He's got a very, he's a very big guy, but he's also got very quick hands and stuff like that. So I think it's the toughest one, but I think if it is a fight that AJ wins, it does bring him right back into that world title conversation. So we'll have to see if it is true. Obviously, we know that Bakole's supposedly meant to be fighting Efe Ajagba in May in an IBF final eliminator. So don't know what the plan is there, unless Ben Shalom and Bakole have just presumed they've already beat Ajagba and they want to go straight into that Anthony Joshua fight afterwards. They want to have two fights signed at once. But it's interesting to see. I wouldn't be shocked if this Ajagba fight doesn't go ahead now. We've not seen an awful lot spoke about it. I know Turkey has said it's happening in May on the Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney card. I know it's supposedly on that one. But when there's a big money fight there and a win over Anthony Joshua is a much bigger win than beating Efe Ajagba in a final eliminator. And even then, final eliminators don't always guarantee you a world title shot anyway. So I think if you're in Bakole's shoes and that Joshua fight is legitimately on the table or was on the table and now signed, they've definitely made the right call in going for that Anthony Joshua fight, especially taking it to Congo in what will be a massive, massive event.
Does that Ajagba fight represent a real big risk for Bakole, do you feel, Josh?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say Ajagba's I'd say he's a very good heavyweight, and while Bakole might be better, it is heavyweight boxing, and the cliche saying is that it only takes one shot, which is true. So if Ajagba is to land that shot, the millions and millions and millions that Bakole would lose there, and the big night headline, and I can't remember what I was watching earlier where I heard someone say this, but Bakole, I think it was Ben Shalom saying this in an interview with the Stomping Ground. He said Bakole's one of those fighters that, because he's not from England or from America and had that back, and he's had to do a lot of his talking in the ring, and that win over Jared Anderson has really catapulted him into that territory where he is being spoken about now, and he is a big name in this division, and he is the bogeyman of the division. So I think you've got to give full credit to Anthony Joshua as well for taking that type of fight, because there's much easier fights out there than Bakole, which could also catapult him straight back into the world title talk. But, Anthony Joshua seems like he's only here for real fights now. Bakole seems to be the realist fight. So if Bakole versus Ajagba goes ahead, Bakole's got to be switched on that night, because if he just thinks that he'll beat Ajagba in first gear, he's in for a big shock, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'll jump into the comments in the chat as to what the reaction is to this fight, if it truly is the case and is signed and sealed after Martin Bakole does fight Ajagba, or that fight gets pulled off. But I feel that Martin Bakole does get through Efe Ajagba. Will be a fight where maybe it might get difficult in some spots, but Martin Bakole seems to be a runaway freight train that I think Ajagba doesn't quite have the momentum to stop right now. There is a poll that's going up, or I think it is up now in the chat for you guys to give us your responses to whether you think that Anthony Joshua beats Martin Bakole or Martin Bakole will beat Anthony Joshua. But that is an interesting and an intriguing fight with other options seemingly on the table. And though there is contextually with Anthony Joshua off of the back of the resounding, emphatic defeat to Daniel Dubois, there was the thought that he was injured and there's an injury, and does this, this will have to happen after May. So is this given enough time for AJ to rest and recuperate and heal off of the injury going into a fight later on in the year? And then what does it represent in terms of a challenge for AJ? Because there were other options potentially on the table. Rematch Daniel Dubois, of course, that's now off the table, but Deontay Wilder was a potential option. Two fighters who are, I guess, fallen down the ladder, but one could proclaim that they're back up there off the back of beating the other Dylan White as well, too. I think Frank Warren alluded to in his interview recently with Box Nation that Dylan seems to be able to fight in the UK now after having fights over in Malta and Ireland. So does that rivalry get reignited? Or some of the conversations that you have with AJ's team and AJ, you hear him want to get back into title contention, and the fight with Tyson Fury are the ones that he earmarked as those that he'd be looking for this year. Well, if Tyson Fury is now retired, that pulls Tyson Fury off of the table. Title contention, you've got to beat one of the rising contenders, and Martin Bakole is one of those rising contenders, with the others currently locked in to fight each other. Bakole is one who represents someone who is, of course, of African descent. So the likes of a Jean Cabell winner wouldn't quite represent that. So Bakole seemed like one of the most straightforward options, but he does represent for me a real tough option because of just the momentum he has built. I remember watching Bakole in one of my first fights I ever covered. It was in Newcastle. He was on the undercard of Ritson versus Davis, I believe it was. And I remember Ryan Elliott, who was formerly of Boxing Social, now of Boxing News, kind of turning to me and saying, this guy is a real good fighter. I really like him. He's real good at like European level. Maybe just falters a little bit at world level, but he's a real good fighter, one to watch out for. And he did look like that, but he did falter with his potential and that defeat to Michael Hunter. But that's a completely different sort of style and a version of Bakole that he felt wasn't the full version of himself, and he's improved much more since that fight. And AJ just would represent a fleet feet type of fighter, or a real movement side to side type of fighter, as Michael Hunter does. He's now a lot more. He does box more than he did before, but he's not going to be hard to find. And that's a worry, I think, with Bakole's punching power and just how big he is as well. Can AJ put a dent in him? I still think I'd probably favor Anthony Joshua a little bit against Bakole, but not by much. I think it's a razor close fight. I think it's about as 50-50 as you can get. And if I'm talking about favoring Anthony Joshua, it's 51% over 49% in that fight, but a real tough fight in prospect.